No worries, it looks great.
Okay. So we do have a shorter amount of time today, so I'm just kind of going to focus on a few aspects of grant writing and grant development, and thought I would focus a little more on best practices and some common mistakes. And then we're going to talk, spend some more time on the broader impacts, because that is an area that I see that a lot of people struggle in, and it's changing a little bit the importance of it. So talking about common mistakes across the board, some areas that we see are compliance with the solicitation. The overview or need section is a lot of times not as fleshed out as it should be. And then a discussion of risks being insufficient or not included, and then broader impacts and review. So when you are in the final review, you should always attempt to get somebody else to read it, just to have a second set of eyes on it. If that's not an option, then make sure you're really trying to read it very closely. As you all know, a lot of times you can get so close to a text that you're reading it the way you think it is and not how it's actually written. And a way to circumvent that, if you can't get anyone else to read it and you are so close to the text, is just read it backwards, because that forces your brain to read each word individually instead of reading it as in groups of words as we tend to. I've just seen things where, one letter has been changed in a word and it changes it from a very, the right word that you need to a word that you don't want into a final proposal. And then, and I know this sounds really elementary, but you would be surprised how often this isn't done. Make sure you are reading the solicitation and reading it very, very carefully. A lot of times people say, well, this proposal has been, or this solicitation has been around forever, so I don't really need to read it. I know what it is. But nuances in it can change, especially when there's changes in administration, because they have priorities which trickle down to all of the agencies. So just make sure that you're reading it and you are having it accurate. So in forms of compliance, some areas that are often common mistakes are it's missing an element, such as it's not responding to all of the prompts within the solicitation. It could be missing needed letters of collaboration, partnership, letters of support that are required from the various institutions. Possibly there are some budget items that are not allowed. And even sometimes it's as simple as not using the right font or the right font size. The margins are, maybe somebody got confused and are using NIH margin sizes, which are smaller than the NSF, which is 1-inch margins. The spacing, are you using really small spacing than when maybe that solicitation specifies that it has to be a certain spacing? Maybe you're over the limit. If it's 15-page limit, you cannot be 15 pages and one line. Or even if it's 15 pages and you're 13 and a half pages, that says that maybe there's a section that's not fleshed out as much as it should be. So just think about that. And part of this is personal preference, but there's always a debate about whether you should do ragged right or left justification for your justification in grants and in proposals. Visually, I agree that left justification, which lines everything up nicely, looks really nice. There is some thought that says the ragged right has less eye fatigue. So you want to use everything you can to ease fatigue on reviewers, because they're going to be reviewing so many. So that's not a hard and fast rule. It's just an area to consider. Now on the right hand on the slide, this is a very high level outline. And what's in that kind of that tan color, that is prompts from the solicitation that are verbatim copied and pasted. And certain grant writing methods, such as the Shipley method, suggest that you do this. And the reason is that you're putting in every single element that the solicitation is requiring. That, so when you're writing, you're not missing anything. And then you can go back and, excuse me, look at it directly instead of trying to thumb through like a 50-page solicitation to find it again. It's just making sure, it's kind of helping you organize and make sure that you are answering everything that's going to be reviewed. As you get into later drafts, that can be deleted. They can be changed into headlines. You can combine different prompts, but it's just there to help organize you when you're initially writing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the overview section, also sometimes called the need section. And the reason we're going to talk about this is sometimes it's not as strong as it should be or could be. Basically, this is the opportunity for you to explain the project, the gap in it, and why it's important. A lot of people consider this the absolute most important section of the proposal, and that if you haven't convinced a reviewer that your proposal is the one that should be funded by the end of that section, then you're behind the 8 ball. It's also the driving force of the proposal. Once you have that nailed down, it'll help lay out the rest of the proposal nicely. Some things to consider is make sure it's compelling and it resonates not only with the funding agency, but also the very specific solicitation. You can have a beautifully written grant proposal, but maybe the solicitation is more about the mechanics of, let's say, water treatment and purification. But your project that you're proposing is more about trying to get communities to adopt a new system. It doesn't quite fit, and it's not worth your time or the reviewer's time if it doesn't quite fit. You can always find an opportunity out there that will fit. So just make sure it's specific to the solicitation. When you're writing this, a kind of a guiding question should be, would the successful pursuit of this idea or program need positively and significantly impact the target audience? It should include some information on the current knowledge. It shouldn't be overly known information, but you're trying to inform and educate the reviewers, bringing them up to speed. And then you're going to outline what the gap is. And that's really, in some ways, the crux of your argument is saying, this is where we are, this is the need, and this is what we're going to fill. So this overview needs section, I say paragraphs, but you can break it up in smaller paragraphs if you want to or need to. So we'll call them sections for right now. The first one should be identifying the need and the gap. And we're going to go a little bit into this in a minute. The second section, you're outlining your project or your idea. It's the who, the what, the why. The third section is doing a brief overview of your methodology or approach. And then the fourth section is the expected outcomes, what the result of it will be. So for the opening sentence, you want to make sure it's not overly known information. It should be just enough that people know it, but then you're providing some more information. So I'm just giving some examples here. Like an unhelpful opening sentence might be, resilience is necessary for strong communities. Hopefully everybody knows that. Some more helpful information would be something along the lines of, The concept of resilience emerged from ecology in the 1970s, steadily diffused through a wide spectrum of disciplines, and is now starting to transform scientific understanding of rural communities. However, much rural resilience work has focused on the aftermath of natural disasters and sudden shocks such as COVID-19, i.e. pulse disturbances, while often ignoring the slow burn changes, i.e. crest disturbances, resulting from long-term trends such as infrastructure decay, groundwater pollution, and growing rural-urban divides in health, income, and digital connectivity. So hopefully you can see there that you were providing some information that has a little bit of known information, but then some new information, and giving an overview, a very broad look at maybe what you're going to be talking about. The next section, or the next part, you should be talking about the gap in either the knowledge, the technology, the programs, whatever your project is going to be, and then identifying the critical need. Based off of the example we just talked about, this is what we use for this next section. Despite the critical need to ensure rural resilience, much of the resilience literature lacks adequate input from rural residents. That's the gap. There's also a lack of convergence research, another gap, that integrates expertise from social, ecological, and engineering perspectives to understand the processes that shape community resilience and pre- and post-disturbance trajectories. Thus, there is substantial uncertainty about how rural communities understand and prioritize resilience, how to effectively quantify and predict rural resilience, and how researchers and community members can effectively collaborate to put resilience science into action for the benefit of rural people and places. Therefore, a compelling need, i.e. the critical need, exists to improve applications of place-based resilience thinking and building in rural communities. These applications must prioritize rural perspectives and converge of social, ecological, and engineering disciplines to understand the interactions in these complex adaptive systems. So as you saw, we outlined the gap and then the need, or the critical need. So then the next component will be your objectives for both your long-term kind of research plan and then your specific aims or objectives for your proposal. If you're doing a research proposal, you should include the central hypothesis. If it's a more programmatic proposal, then you can do the central need for the program. You can also include how it was formulated. Some people will call this the justification or the rationale. And then finally, talk about why your team or the PI are well suited to implement this. Based off of the examples we've been using so far, here's how we crafted it for this grant. Our long-term goal is to contribute to the protection and improvement of quality of life for rural people and the conservation and flourishing of rural places. So you're outlining your research plan, which is obviously more than you can do in one proposal. The overall objective of this proposal is to develop convergence research that transforms scientific understanding of rural resilience and empowers communities in resilience thinking and building. Our central hypothesis is that place-based participatory action research, engaging community members, youth, and university students will strengthen rural resilience and catalyze convergence across scientific disciplines. To achieve our overall objective, we propose the following 4 specific aims. And then, what we have below, you will do that for all of your aims. You're going to have what your aim or your objective is in bold, and then underneath it, do a sentence or 2 based on saying what your hypothesis is. If it's research, if it's not, if it's programmatic, then you can say what your what your result is or how you think it will help. And then finally, you will talk about why your team or you individually are well suited for this. So in this case, as you can see, we talked about the working relationships with rural communities, the various disciplines that were involved in the team, and how the communities that were chosen are well suited for the project, the child poverty rates, the natural amenities, all the aspects that we need. So now we're going to switch over to talking more about the risks. You'll also see this sometimes as the potential problems and alternative approaches. So here I'm just showing you where generally the best place to include it is. So when you get to your approach or methodology section, your first, you're going to have your aim or your objective, and you're going to repeat that verbatim from what you did in the overview section. Then you'll have a short introduction. Then you're going to outline the various steps to achieve that aim. Then you're going to do your expected outcomes. And then the final paragraph of that will be the potential problems and alternative approaches. So why is this important? I know there's a lot of thought of, well, we don't want to tell the reviewers that there's problems with this, or there could be problems. If you don't, though, you're leaving it open to the reviewers to think what the problem is or what the risks are. And that could be more challenging than what the risks actually are. And it also signifies to the reviewers that you've thought through everything and know that if situation A happens, we're going to go to situation B to make sure that we're still getting data. As much as federal agencies like to say that they are looking for high risk, high reward projects and out of the box thinking, they are actually risk averse. And part of that is because they need research artifacts, they need publications, they need outcomes. And as we all know, we can't really publish negative data. So you need something positive, some results that you can publish and disseminate for how things are going to change. One risk that you should always include, especially if it's research, is that the hypothesis could prove invalid. And because that always is a risk, because otherwise you would know the outcome, and then why are they funding research that they already know the outcome to? So identify that and then talk about other solutions that you can do. Maybe you'll switch to another area, another aspect. This is a good example of talking about the risks. You don't want to be overly long, because then it does have the perception of like, oh, this is really risky. But just, a few sentences, one or two risks is plenty. And you always kind of want to qualify it, as you'll see in this example. Although unlikely, given our preliminary data, so you're saying, hey, the literature and our data says that this is unlikely to be a risk. Our working hypothesis could prove invalid. To mitigate this, we will ensure all communities receive the same data collection procedures to diminish the possibility of interviewer effect. Further potential problems include common issues and errors in social science research, such as incomplete samples and under or over sampling. To minimize this, we will use the modified snowball procedure, which is used to identify a relevant population that the mailing list omitted. We understand that gaining access to some segments of the community may be a challenge given potential mistrust. Our existing relationships with community leaders, see letters of collaboration, will help us gain access to various subpopulations. So very succinctly identified potential risks, and identified ways to overcome those. So now we're going to move on to the broader impacts. Oops. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. So a lot of times, the broader impacts tend to be an afterthought. And it's, oh, right, I need to do the broader impacts. Okay, well, I can just work with our LSAMP office or our undergraduate research office and just say that we're just going to work with them. Well, that's not really enough. And especially now, it's not enough. There's a much bigger push to have broader impacts and have them really integrated into the project, whether it's research or programmatic. And you're going to see it in from various agencies, not just NSF. We also need to try to do a bit of a cultural change. Sometimes PIs can have a bit of a pushback because and sometimes our beliefs that, well, broader impacts don't really help me getting tenure or doesn't help me with promotion. But if we can change that narrative a little bit and say, well, this is really part of your service, or, hey, integrate this into your research more, and then you can get data from this that you can publish. So then it's going towards your record of publications. So NSF lists several examples of broader impacts, and they are very clear that saying that this is not the exhaustive list, but these are the ones that most people try to relate their broader impacts program to. Potential of the project to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. Full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities. Improve STEM education and educator development at any level. Increase public scientific literacy and public engagement. Improved well-being of individuals in society. Development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce. Increased partnerships between academia, industry, and others. Improved national security. Increased economic competitiveness of the US. Use of science and technology to inform public policy. And finally, enhanced research and education infrastructure. So as you can see, that's really broad. So every project, whether it is research or programmatic, can apply or relate to one of these broader impacts. Sometimes, especially if you're doing research, the research itself can be broader impact. Same thing with programmatic, especially if it's a training grant, then that can relate to the broader impacts. Examples are, let's say you're doing research and or training program on cybersecurity. Well, that relates to US security, national security. If you are going back to the water example, if you're doing work on removing nitrates from water, that is well-being for citizens. You can also do a separate project that integrates with the wider project. Examples of that are summer camp for K-12 students, free public talks, a new curriculum, whether that is for K-12 students or higher education students, public demonstrations, or maybe a training program. It can be a summer research opportunity for students or educators, an internship program that you set up with industry. Those are just a few examples. It shouldn't be an afterthought, as we said. It should integrate with the wider project. And it should be more than, okay, well, I'm going to go over to the local public school and talk to one science class for one day. That's not enough. It needs to be more than that. So last week, I believe it was, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, NSF released a press release that said that there were some new priorities coming down from the Biden administration, and those included climate change and clean energy, emerging technologies, racial equity, and research infrastructure. As you can see, those relate to some of the broader impacts that we talked about. So those are just something to consider as you're developing it. So now we're going to go through a series of questions and guiding principles that you can think about as you're developing your broader impacts. First one is, what is the potential for the activity to benefit society or advance societal outcome? Now, all of these questions are coming from the merit review that's in the NSF documents. So these aren't just made up. These are aspects of the reviewers are going to be told to think about. So some principles to think about as you're writing or answering this part is, are the activities related to your overall project's goals? What partners and collaborators are needed to successfully implement the broader impact activities? Are the participants clearly described? The size, recruitment, engagement level. Thinking about size, if you're going to have a large audience, maybe 300 people, you're probably going to have a shorter engagement time, and you're going to cover more introductory concepts. You just can't get into depth with 300 people. If it's a smaller group, you can do deeper integration, deeper experience, and maybe you do 4, 6 small groups, interactions with that small group. And what are the benefits to society? The second one is, to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? Some principles when you're to answer this are the activities leveraging other resources? Do you have an LSAMP office? Do you have an undergraduate research office? Do you have a technology development office? Do you have a corporate or industry engagement individual? All of these that might be able to help you. What new elements are introduced? How can the activity transform an existing program? What are the creative and original elements? Is it evidence-based? And what are the citations? That will be important, is making sure that you can show that there is success for this. 3, is the plan for the activities well reasoned? Does the plan incorporate assessment? So in this, you're going to want to document the need for the activity. Again, you can use literature citations. Maybe it's figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, the Center for Education Research, just showing that, yes, or maybe it's your own internal data saying, okay, 50% of our students that are transferring from a 2-year college into this program are not finishing. So we need to do something about that. And I know this other program, this other school, which has similar students with similar demographics to us, have had a lot of success using this program. So we're going to try that and then tailor it to our students by doing A, B, and C. Again, is the appropriate literature cited? And it's important that in your evaluation, you include evaluation on the broader impacts. 4, how well qualified is the individual or team to conduct the activities? Is evidence provided that the team has the necessary experience? Are the resources appropriate and adequate for the scale of the project? If you are at Oklahoma State, I know Julie Engel with OSU Teach is very helpful in setting up programs with K-12 students and help with the evaluation and assessment of those programs. If you're at another institution in Oklahoma, you might reach out and see if there is somebody who does do outreach with the community who might be able to help you with that. And finally, are there adequate resources available to carry out the activities? Have you identified the infrastructure and support the institution may have to help with implementing the activities and the evaluation? And importantly, is money, funds for these activities and any resources that you need identified in the budget and the budget justification? A lot of times people are just narrowly focusing on the budget for the programmatic or the research part of their overall proposal. And they kind of forget about the broader impacts. What are you going to need? Some technology? Are you going to need some materials or supplies? Are you going to need to help bring somebody on to implement this? Make sure that that's accounted for so that when it's being reviewed, it's like, okay, yeah, they have a great program and they have everything that they need, the resources, the people to implement it successfully. So NSF has a great guide out there that helps with broader impacts. They go into more detail than what we just did, and they break down each of the different broader impacts that we talked about at the beginning. It's called Perspectives on Broader Impacts, and the first one is their link to it. Then this other link is from an outside agency, and they also talk about different ways in developing your broader impacts and guiding principles on that. If you Google, there's a lot of information out there. I believe it's Tufts. UPenn have some really good guides as well. So there's lots of information out there on developing these. But I don't think I can emphasize enough how important broader impacts are. And a lot of times if research or programmatic grants are on level, but one has a strong broader impacts program and the other one doesn't, it's going to go to the first proposal that has that strong broader impacts. And part of that is people want to see results from the funding, and it's not just the research artifacts, which are vitally important, but it's how is this helping society? It's trying to make it so that academia is not so separate from helping societal good. So that's what I have for today. I guess I will open it up to questions now.
Hi, I was wondering about being able to show that, you know, your team is, I guess, maybe not the best, because that's hard to say if you don't know who your competition is, but certainly one of the best to be able to perform a certain research project. So if you're at like a smaller regional university, there may be larger teams at top 10 schools that are performing similar research. So how do you show, you know, that your group is a good pick, not just capable, but, you know, in comparison to your competition?
Yeah, well, one thing I will say, it's always a good idea to say we are the only people doing this, just because there's always work that could be going on that people aren't aware of. So you can always qualify that by saying, to the best of our knowledge, we are the only ones doing this work. But you can just talk about how if you are bringing in different disciplines that maybe other research isn't doing, or talk about how you may have access to a certain group of individuals depending on what your research is. Just what is unique about your group that's not with those other groups that may be from a top 10 university. There's always ways to describe, and I understand where you're coming from, because yes, sometimes there can just be this prejudice isn't the right word, but it's like, oh, well, you know, they're a top school, so they're going to be better at it. But that's not the case. We know that. So just really talking about your experience or what unique aspects you can bring to the program. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, maybe being able to emphasize that you plan on collaborating with maybe a lab that's at a larger university might be helpful.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll hop in. Yeah, I'll hop in. How are you? One of the things that we have here is we have a lot of students on this Zoom today, a lot of graduate students, postdocs, junior faculty. And one of the questions that I get quite a bit is about having an idea that they're interested in pursuing funding for. And how is it that they find an appropriate funding source for their ideas? Do you have any tips and tricks that you could share with folks on that?
Yeah, so there's, depending on what your research or your program is, you can try to boil it down to one of the federal agencies if you want to go that route. Grants.gov is a great resource. You can go in there and you can click if there's a specific agency that you're interested in, who's eligible to apply, and it will bring up more opportunities than you would ever want. But you can go through those and really look at what's in the pipeline or what's active, and then you can even look at to see what has previously been awarded. You can sign up for the Federal Register, which is where they publish every grant solicitation, and they will email it to you, and you can specify which type of grant you're interested in, so you won't be getting, you know, tons of emails every day. If you're interested in USDA, they have a newsletter that you can subscribe to that will send you emails when new opportunities become available. Same thing with NIH, or not, NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. And as weird as it seems, I've actually had some success with just doing a good old Google alert, putting in whatever my topic is, grant opportunity, and then every once in a while I get an email, and some of them, a lot of times they're like news articles, but every once in a while it's like, oh, that did not show up on my radar. That is an interesting one. If you're looking for more foundations, P&D, Philanthropic News Digest, they, depending on your frequency that you sign up for, they can send you out a daily email or a weekly email of opportunities within the foundation world. And then they do a good job of separating it between higher education, healthcare, racial equity, things along those lines. So those are good ways to look.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Mariana, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you very much, Mariana. Yes, I will be working with a charity organization. Eventually, I'd like to, of course, have a salary. Now, some places seem to be unsure about how they would get funding to pay a grant writer. So I was wondering if you know of a website where that I could find out information about that.
Yeah, so you will almost never come across a solicitation that will allow you to use funds to pay a grant writer. That's kind of a general unallowable expense. So if somebody is interested in hiring a grant writer, it's going to have to be out of their general operating funding. That's just the way the world works in that case. You're muted.
Okay, so general operating funding. So are there any rules or regulations that I need to observe?
No, I mean, that would be completely separate from any like federal or generally grant funding. So they would just work out individually with the grant writer. I will tell you that most competent grant writers require either an hourly or a set fee, and they do not do it on commission. So,
Okay, hourly, not commission.
right, hourly or a set fee, saying, okay, well, I will write this for this amount of money, and it will whatever hours it is. But commission generally is not what most grant writers won't do, just because, I mean, sometimes it can be 9 months before you get the results, and that just puts all of the risk on the grant writer, and it's frowned upon within the grant writing world to do commission-based writing.
Okay, yeah, if you have a suggestion, a website that I could just, any information on that?
Let's see. There's the Grant Professionals Association. I think they might list some people who do some work there. But honestly, I think I would just put out feelers and talk to people who have written grants or write grants, and like, hey, do you know anybody who does this type of work? There are so many people out there who say, yeah, I'm a grant writer, because they think, hey, they're a good writer, so that means that they're a good grant writer, but it's a different skill set. So that would be my main suggestions, asking for recommendations based off of other people.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
R. Brennan has their hand up.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the great presentation. And you mentioned about writing potential risks even in the overview section. Is there a difference between NIH and NSF proposals about writing the risk? What I mean is, I guess in NIH proposals, it makes more sense to write possible risks because you design maybe some health experiments, but in NSF, it is maybe less common. Am I right? Or should we always mention risk?
My recommendation would be to, no matter what agency you're writing to include risks. Now, I apologize if I wasn't clear. I wouldn't include that in the overview section, just in the approach or the methodology section at the end of each of your aims. But yeah, NIH, NSF, USDA, even NEH, I would definitely include just an inclusion of risks. I think it's important, and it just shows that you know what you're talking about and you've thought through all of the issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the chat, Diana says that she's writing a grant, and it says that there's a section called Nature and another one called Scope. Could you please help her to understand the difference between these two?
Yeah, so I would say the scope is your methodology or approach section. In the nature, I would say that that's probably more of the overview section, or maybe including a little bit of the background. If you can situate it within the broader context of what's going on, if it's research, what other research has been done and how your research is different, how it will help advance the state of the art if it's programmatic, how it's maybe different than other programs, how it's expanding an existing program if that's the case, but then the scope, I would say, is definitely your methodology, your approach, how you're going to actually implement it.
I don't see any more hands, but there may be some that I'm not seeing. If anybody has a question, just jump in. Don't be shy. It's a great opportunity. Okay, well, if you have any questions that you'd like to follow up with, Devon, would you be open to me filtering emails through if that's
Absolutely.
okay? So somebody texts and says, what if your school doesn't offer CITI training? I'm not sure what CITI training is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I'm not familiar with that acronym, I probably know it, but my brain is, yep.
Sure, that's CITI training is human subjects training.
Oh, okay.
Required. And some of our regional partners don't always provide CITI training. I'm faculty at the University of Oklahoma, not Oklahoma State. And so let's see, who was that? Sandra, was that you asking that question? I see S. Petty. I'm guessing that's you, Sandra. Anyway, I think contacting the IRB at one of the larger universities, like at the University of Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, and contacting them, they may be able to get you like an affiliated CITI training certificate.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm sure that there's ways around it. I have not come across that myself, so I apologize.
No,
but you're not
worries.
you're not the only one in that situation. So there's definitely a workaround.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is. It's come up for us when we've added some of the regional partners to some of our projects. And so they do not have a certified IRB at their institution. And so I don't know what would happen if you wanted to do it sort of as a standalone, but if you partner with somebody at one of these institutions, there's certainly a way around it. Thank you, Devon. That was super helpful. Much appreciated.
Yes, I know it's a lot of information at once, so hopefully I didn't overwhelm people.
It was a great presentation. If anyone has any questions, you should have my email from all the announcements that you've received from me, and I'd be happy to filter them to Devon. Thank you so much, Devon, for this great presentation today. Our next professional development series seminar is scheduled for October 24th. We'll be sending out some more information on the presenter and details on that presentation in the next couple of weeks. Hope everyone has a great summer, restful break if you can get it. And thank you again, Devon, for a great presentation. This was the largest turnout we've ever had for a professional development series presentation. So everyone was eager and needful of your information. So thank you.
Good. Well, hopefully people found something useful from it. So
I'm sure they did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.